So this is 9:15 almost GMT on Saturday, the 8th of August 2020. We're continuing the diagnosis of Fleet Street, the English language, London-centric newspapers that are dominating the agenda of brainwashing ongoing in this country. And we actually take a look back for a minute at yesterday's Daily Mail, the second highest circulated tabloid in Fleet Street, and as vehemently racist and anti-migrant and hate inciting as the Murdoch-owned Sun newspaper. Now, the Daily Mail is peddling the same hatred agenda against migrants and against people fleeing massacres and starvation and famine in Africa and Asia, as Nigel Farage is fronting today and this weekend. And what is happening is that the Labour Party, fronted by Keir Starmer, is not actually making any impact. In fact, he's not intervening against the racist incitement agenda being carried out at the expense of the most vulnerable and most in need of help group of people, very small number of people. But that is the emptiness and the void that Keir Starmer is representing. And this is significant because while he is representing this void, he is also being touted as being the alternative to Boris Johnson-fronted Conservatives that the, quote, pollsters are finding evidence of, signs of. So if that is the case, and if it is taken to the logical conclusion, then Keir Starmer, in post, in power, sometime in the future, will not only not protect the rights of the people attacked by racists, fronted by Nigel Farage and others, but there will be further attacks and violations, because in government, any government is automatically guaranteed a period of time when it is immune to any criticism or attacks. And so therefore, where do you look? You look at the papers, so-called alternative like The Guardian, which has not played a part in pointing out the obligations that the racists are denying, the obligations that Britain is under according to the international treaties. Any look at the United Nations database or even the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Office's websites will show that there is significant number of contents, data, materials containing the contents of the treaties and what the signatory member states should be doing under the treaties to uphold the rights of people like the migrants by the victims of war, famine, and massacre and genocide. But there is no discussion in Fleet Street today, Saturday the weekend, nor has there been at any time in the last, 70 years since the Treaty of Rome and 72 years since the foundation on the 10th of August 1948 of the United Nations, of which the UK not only is an active member, but is also a member of the Controlling Security Council, where the UK still exerts the veto power, which is decisive in the policy actions taken by the United Nations about anything in the world. So there is a dichotomy, there is a contradiction. The UK has such power and influence in terms of the bureaucracy and the bureaucratic and the procedural composition and constitution of the United Nations, and yet it is one of the flouters, one of the most notorious and persistent flouters and violators of the obligations that come under so many United Nations based in United Nations inspired treaties that the UK remains an active signatory to. Now, this is something that is completely different from the context of the Brexit, because the Brexiteers have never, ever acknowledged, let alone elaborated on, let alone showed any respect for the international role and duties of the UK as a signatory to various international treaties. And these Brexiteers have been peddling, well, the Brexit itself, the slogan itself is a lie, and also it has been based mainly on lies. One of the biggest lies was perpetrated, mouthed, and promoted and flaunted by Boris Johnson when he saw the opportunity, in his view, of becoming the leader of the Conservatives by adopting a Brexiteering line, the racist, anti-migrant, anti-Muslim line. And his main tool was to use Turkey. Turkey is a Muslim country, and Turkey is seen widely as a comparatively powerful and influential country in the world. So Turkey, as a Muslim country, first of all, was a very easy and readily digestible brainwashing ogre for Boris Johnson to cite. And he said, just before the Brexit so-called referendum date, he said that millions of Turks would be coming to Britain. It's not just Boris Johnson, but others, the platforms that gave him platform, the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Express, and the Telegraph, and many of the MPs and many of the people in the racist parties went along with that lie, and they said that Turkey, the millions of Turks would come. Now, this is also a throwback, a reference back to hundreds of years of anti-Muslim kind of demonizing atmosphere existing in Western Europe or across Europe because of what happened when the Muslims arrived in Spain and held powerful positions for hundreds of years. So it is reminding those anti-Muslim persons that Muslims are coming just like they came and took over Spain. Muslims not only took over Spain, they almost came up to Austria. And so that is the background against which the anti-Muslim fear was stoked in the days, in the weeks before the 2016 referendum, so-called, for the British exit from the European Union. And Boris Johnson played the key role in fomenting populist, anti-Muslim, anti-Turkish, anti-EU. They conflated all these things together and created the image of the European Union as almost as a Muslim power, because the EU, they painted a picture of the EU as the vehicle that the Turks, millions of Turks would use to invade, take over, arrive in Britain. Now the fact is that Turkey is not even a member of the EU. And the fact is that the Turks are not going to be allowed by the EU to become a member, not for hundreds of years. That is not a likelihood that appears at all plausible for decades. And yet that lie was invented and fabricated and extended and foisted on the media, through the media, in front of the people, and most of the masses accepted and swallowed that lie, anti-Muslim lie, and they were driven by that to vote for Brexit. That is what this line in the Daily Mail, giving Priti Patel the publicity that she's asked the Navy to, or she's going to ask the Navy to handle the migrants. Migrants, how many? These are not even Turkish migrants. These are people from Africa, mainly people from Africa and people from Asia, Afghanistan, some Iranians, and some other people from other parts of Africa, Asia and Africa. And the heart of this lie is something that actually can be exposed by relying on the British constitutional law obligations with reference to the treaties. That is why it is so important to emphasize the fact that the treaties are never mentioned. The international legal obligations, constitutional obligations are never mentioned, except when some cheap shot is made by saying that the reputation of the country would be damaged if we don't carry out the obligations. Sometimes it's not even regular. And the failure to refer to the treaty obligations actually lies more with the opposition in Britain. And it doesn't matter whether the opposition is, quote, fronted by Jeremy Corbyn, a non-practicing, non-admitted, non-schooled lawyer. He's not a lawyer, but compared to him, Keir Starmer is a lawyer, schooled lawyer, admitted lawyer, licensed law trader. And so therefore, it would be reasonable to expect that Keir Starmer would recognize the British constitutional treaty obligations in relation to human rights, in relation to asylum seekers' rights, in relation to the migrants' rights, in relation to the people who are victims of wars and famine and massacres and genocide, either created or tolerated by the Western powers, including Britain. And there is nothing, no sign of Keir Starmer making that point, either today, this week, last week, or in his entire career. What he has done during the years that he acted as the spokesperson of the Jeremy Corbyn-led or fronted Labour Party in Parliament was to make procedural, bureaucratic, mechanical points about the Conservatives' Brexit lines and contradictions and so forth. But he never created an international framework of British responsibilities. Let's say the only comparison with that international framework came almost to a full presentation when Hilary Benn made a definitive speech against Jeremy Corbyn in the early days of Corbyn being leader of the Labour Party. And Hilary Benn came close to saying what I'm saying should have been happening, but he never actually continued that or completed that analysis, and he never came back on the same theme. After he made that speech, he was highly lauded and kind of widely and noisily lauded by the anti-Corbyn press and the anti-Corbyn members of the Labour Party, Parliamentary Labour Party, and of course the Conservatives and others. So Hilary Benn, 5 years ago or 4 years ago, was the one who made the first and the only intervention by any member of Parliament in the whole of the UK House of Commons that recognized the existence of international treaties. As I said, Hilary Benn did not complete his analysis and he did not come back to it. First of all, he was obviously nervous, having lost the Labour Party's leadership to Jeremy Corbyn, whose politics he opposed and he still opposes. But secondly, he was really attacked by people who thought that he was undermining Jeremy Corbyn. But they shouldn't have attacked him and stopped there. They should have appreciated the fact that he made a rare intervention, which should not be rare, which should not have been rare. It should be one of the routine, regular things that the Labour Party MPs should have been doing in the Houses of Parliament, House of Commons, and the peers, the Labour Party peers in the House of Peers should have been doing, and the media, and the briefing, and the statements in public outside of Parliament. But there has been no recognition of the treaty obligations. So we have been talking about the British treaty obligations in the last few editions, but this is not something that we have been doing just in these broadcasts. I have been an advocate of international treaties for a very good practical reason for a very long time. And the reason is that without the British membership of these various international conventions, treaties, and articles and agreements and memorandums and whatever, the British society, the British government, the British governance culture would have remained in the dark ages. One of the positive things that happened in the events that followed the end of the so-called Second World War was the foundation, of course, of the United Nations, and even more importantly, the drafting of so many declarations that actually created an environment of international understanding and tolerance and respect among nation states. And that was contributed to significantly by several members of the British establishment, the British judiciary, and a number of British licensed law traders and judges took part in writing and drafting so many of the articles. So it is not just ironic, it is absolutely catastrophic departure from those ideals and values by the Labour Party, because many of the participants and the drafters were Labour Party members or supporters, or they were independent people. And this tradition, this actual legacy, is something that internationally and objectively the British can be proud of. And yet this has been squandered. This has been squandered for 72 years. And I'm saying that it is time to go back to those treaties, those values, and those founding aims and objects, and create the environment, intellectual environment, moral environment, social environment, to get rid of the agenda that is now taking the country back to the darkest of darkness. It is not the conservative or the Tories. That is not explanatory enough, or it doesn't explain enough of the badness and the darkness that is happening, has been happening. It is the actual thinking of the people who have taken over the Conservative Party. And Dominic Grieve and others have articulated from their own experience. And I'm saying that the atmosphere in the British Parliament as it is now has to be dramatically shifted, changed, and the dark forces that have taken numerical control through Boris Johnson's frontage and facade can be replaced by a vigorous reference back every day, every sitting day in Parliament to all those values, the founding aims and objects. That is how I'm saying the British political map and the direction and the course need to be changed, can be changed, and must be changed. And the media, the press so-called, will follow suit, will have no option but to follow suit if the debate is vigorously, rigorously instated and reinstated in accordance with the international treaty obligations that Britain is signed up to even now. And regardless of Brexit, those treaties, most of the treaties will be there, because Brexit and the EU is not the depository, or the EU is not the cause of so many humanitarian international treaties and obligations. Let's put it this way. The EU evolved various stages from that economic union to the European Union. So therefore there has been inconsistent movement from the stage of the EC to the EU. And that inconsistency is in the fact that the movement has not been for liberalizing the culture, the governance culture of member states. It has been other things, including economic and military and the other factors that have been contributed to and prompted by the operation, the presence and the influence of the military industrial complex, the war makers, and the imperialistic tendencies. So the founding aims and objects of the United Nations of 10th of December 1948 and the Treaty of Rome combined have played more significant roles in giving rise to various treaties, and especially in the United Nations context, the treaties include a significant volume and amount of protection for the environment. And this is something that is absolutely important and essential to point out. And I said to Greta Thunberg that is proof that she doesn't, obviously, she's not to blame for her ignorance, but she cannot be given credit where she does not deserve credit, because she has not recognized the existence of the United Nations, treaties and declarations and agreements and charters. And Thunberg needs to be told that they are already there in place, and she can refer to them, and she can then condemn correctly in an updated form the failure of the United Nations members to implement those. That is the way to go forward. Instead of, as she has done often, dismissing the United Nations assemblies most often as being useless. Of course, they are useless, but she has to put them in context of the existing instruments and articles and declarations that can be used and should be used and must be used to protect what remains of our planet, fragile planet. And so therefore, the United Nations is essential for the survival of the planet, and the UK must remain, not only remain, but actively remain a member of these treaties and implement them. And there the incomplete beginning by Hilary Benn should be resumed by Benn and others. And that is where the Labour Party's positive role in society actually rests. And that is the way to go. Not the way Keir Starmer, forensic silence and forensic idiocies and forensic capitulation to racists and forensic collaboration collusions. Those will not save the Labour Party. Keir Starmer may be being touted as doing better than Corbyn in the polls in comparison with the Tories, but that way does not lie the success in terms of parliamentary election, and let alone in defending the communities that have been being attacked by the Conservatives. Now, this is the Daily Mirror today, which is Saturday, the 8th of August. And the biggest thing they're saying about this is that British people are flocking to the coast of for mini heat wave, and they're exclusive on that side. It is smaller display, but that is the continuation of their so-called exclusive about Dominic Cummings breaking the lockdown the second time. And we shall go to that claimed exclusive. And we shall do that. Now, the claim that the Daily Mirror is claiming that Boris Johnson is under pressure. Going by the behavior of Boris Johnson in response to various claims and allegations of wrongdoing by him, it is not possible to see how Boris Johnson can be described as being under pressure. He will show two fingers. He will not show any remorse. He will not show any acknowledgement of his duties. So they're saying that the Daily Mirror is saying this. The Daily Mirror quoted a letter, or the first half of the letter, written by the Haque MP, Meg Hillier. And she's saying, the Liaison Committee on 27th May, at the Liaison Committee on 27th May, Meg Hillier, asked Boris Johnson if he had seen evidence that verified the account by his senior advisor, Dominic Cummings, of Cummings's movements during the lockdown. And Meg Hillier is saying to Boris Johnson that Boris Johnson told the Liaison Committee that he, Boris Johnson, had seen the evidence and that there were a number of false allegations against Dominic Cummings. And Meg Hillier continues and says that Boris Johnson refused then to release the evidence or to ask the Cabinet Secretary to investigate further. Since then, further witnesses have come forward saying they saw Mr. Cummings in Durham on 19th of April. He is on the record saying he was in London on that day. So it goes on. Obviously, the detail is about what Cummings said and what the witnesses who saw him said and what the MPs attending the Liaison Committee, which is the collection of chairs of various select committees who attend that Liaison Committee. And there is a piece in the Mirror which says, high praise for Mirror's Pippa. The Daily Mirror's political editor, Pippa Crerar, has been named one of the UK's most influential women. She joins the Queen and Emily Maitlis in Vogue's top 25 list for 2020. We discussed that yesterday. The Queen is not joined by anybody. Queen is at the bottom of the list of the 25, but never mind. Pippa, who was praised for breaking the story of Dominic Cummings' lockdown violations, said, I'm thrilled that the hard work of everybody at the Mirror on the Dominic Cummings story should be recognized in this way. It's a story of holding power to account. I have a feeling that it isn't over yet. Absolutely right. Now, if that is the case, then the Labour Party leadership is at fault. They should be running with this miles ahead of Boris Johnson, and this should be the typical example of actual forensic audit and accounting and holding to account of the executive. But Corbyn's replacement, Keir Starmer, has failed to show that he is up for the job and he is doing the job he's supposed to be doing. And Angela Rayner, who is the deputy leader of the Labour Party, has been given a space in there. And she's saying things that have been said before about Dominic Cummings, showing two fingers. She's saying if Dominic Cummings was in London during both the
morning and afternoon of April 19, then he has nothing to hide. I'm sure he will welcome this opportunity to show us the evidence and set the record straight. Now, if that's the most rigorous demand that Angela Rayner can make about Dominic Cummings, then of course she is following Keir Starmer and not being rigorous at all. The demand from the Labour Party on the evidence, mounting evidence of wrongdoing and abuses of position and power by Boris Johnson should be that Johnson should quit the post. He is not fit. And the background should be the danger, the threat the society faces under the pandemic, but also accompanying other failures and other dangers and denials that they're showing. And the Daily Star is talking about I'm a celebrity. Now that shows that they don't care about the pandemic to the extent that they claim otherwise to be caring. And they are also flaunting this seaside heat wave bonanza, and they are not discouraging people from indulging. And they are taking a kind of childish kind of nick of Dominic Cummings. And it is not going to make him resign. He's not going to resign. And so the rest of the Daily Star is full of typical tabloid trash, which is not responsible, and it doesn't care anything about the international obligations that Britain is under and the Britain is actually flouting. And they have, of course, the continuation of the Caroline Flack mother's anguish and demand and other grief-stricken expressions of condemnation of those who let her daughter down and forced her or caused her or encouraged her to end up in the way that she did. And this is the Daily Mail today, 30 million reasons to cheer. We have done that in the first edition of this diagnosis. But the Daily Mail is wrong because there are other failures in relation to the protection of the health workers and care workers that it is hiding. And they're over celebrating their kind of belated initiative to get this personal protection to the health workers. They're not covering the actual underfunding of the health service or the care service, and they're not doing this just accidentally. They're doing it as part of the agenda they support, the agenda against the welfare state, the agenda against the national health service, the agenda against a society that Margaret Thatcher actually denied the existence of. So, and the Daily Mirror is not following up its claim to be holding Dominic Cummings to account by talking about all these issues that I have been talking about in the absence of an alternative to the right-wing dominated, racist dominated media. There is nothing in the Daily Mirror substantially opposed to Nigel Farage and his latest propaganda at the expense of the victims of violence and genocide and hunger and famine. And this is the two-page spread about another Boris, the Boris Becker, the German sports person, ex-sports person. And there are 2 pages about his relationship with his ex-girlfriend or whatever. Now, in this two-page editorial page or op-ed, the Daily Mail is talking about the poor going to be the victims of the pandemic, incompetence, whatever. We'll come to that in a second. Now, the pages 16 and 17 of the Daily Mail is following up the scare and anti-migrant hateful piece that ran yesterday promoting Priti Patel calling on the Navy to tackle migrant crisis. And there is a piece by Sue Reed in the Daily Mail. Now, those who are not familiar, students of the crassness and the racist role played by the Daily Mail, and those who never visited Britain, and those who don't know the British press, the Daily Mail has been the flag carrier of racist British press for decades. And it is the place where some of the worst racist haters and propagandists have got platforms. It's not the only one. Of course, Rupert Murdoch's stable of the Sun and the Sun on Sunday now and the News of the World before and the Times and the Sunday Times have been giving platforms to racists and haters and liars and people who violate human rights and the treaty obligations that Britain is under. But the Daily Mail has been the one single title that has been absolutely horrendously inciting racism and racist hatred. And among those people who have been writing some of the most devastatingly racist and hateful investigative reports, so-called, has been Sue Reed. And her piece about these migrants today is something that we shall be talking about at some length in this edition. Her conclusion, the paragraph, the third paragraph from the bottom of her piece, Sue Reed says, and this is absolutely typical Sue Reed. She says, meanwhile, there is nothing to alleviate the fear, alleviate the lingering fear that among this summer migration, there could be those who want to harm us, returning IS fighters, spies from hostile nations, hoping to embed themselves here, would-be terrorists and criminals escaping justice abroad. Now, I'll come to that paragraph in a minute. I'll continue to the next paragraph. She says, looking at Thursday's images of the traffickers' latest cohort, including small children and a pregnant woman, I hope the penny will drop in high places, as it did for me so many years ago. By yesterday evening, another 17 boats carrying 150 migrants reached Britain from France. By the time you read this, there may be even more still. So what she is doing is, Sue Reed, she is actually conflating three different things into one and creating a nightmare scenario for Britain. Now she's saying in that paragraph, the third paragraph from the bottom, there is nothing to alleviate the lingering fear that among this summer migration, there could be those who want to harm us.
she's obviously saying that the migrants are not among us. She's not including people like me and others who are living in this country for decades. She's excluding us. She is meaning white people, and she's meaning little English people. She's not even including people from outside of England in the UK. So she's saying that those people who want to harm us. Now, how would they harm us and not everyone? She doesn't know what the harm would be done, what kind of way the harm would be done. Returning IS fighters. Now, as we know, returning IS fighters, she cannot tell who is the IS fighter. She cannot count. And the IS fighters are not fighters that are inspired by genuine Islam. IS fighters is an invention that has been imposed in the public mind by all kinds of propaganda operations run by the warmongers. And the IS, whoever these people are part of that war. They don't represent, and they cannot represent, they will never represent, and they will not care about, quote, Muslims. These are not anything to do with Muslims and Islam. But Suri doesn't say that, but she implies, and that implication actually condemns Muslims. Although she doesn't say Muslim fighters, but IS fighters are associated with Muslims. In Islam, there is nothing in the history of Islam since it was introduced that says that you go and attack innocent people. Never. In fact, the protection of innocent and vulnerable people is a precondition for any otherwise legitimized or legitimizable war that a Muslim can take part in. If there is no guarantee of protecting children, vulnerable and the old, there should not be a war. And these people, so-called IS, don't give anything to children, women, vulnerable, whatever. In any case, there is no evidence that they have been constituted by consulting Muslims anywhere. It suddenly appeared. So that is the conspiracy. Who conceived of the IS? Where do they come from? Who are they accountable to? And most certainly they are not accountable to the Muslims, and they are not accountable to Muslim countries, societies, anywhere. And no Surid, no Trump, no Johnson, no Nigel Farage can say that the IS has been produced by any state, any Muslim state or any Muslim community. If they can, then let them do it. They haven't done it. They haven't done it yet. So they are maligning the image of millions of innocent people who just happen to be Muslim, and they're maligning them. And that is irresponsible criminality and a criminal offense and incitement. And any forensic lawyer who is the leader of the parliament in parliamentary opposition in Britain has a duty to get a grip on this and speak. Stop maligning innocent people by insinuating some kind of association with the IS. And then she goes on and talks about spies from hostile nations hoping to embed themselves here. Where does she get this from? By any account, Frederick Forsyth will be accepted as a person who knows about spies embedding from anywhere. Then Surid will know about those factors and operatives in her own rest of her life, or has known in the previous decades she has been operating as a propagandist
for races.
Frederick Forsyth wrote an article, surprisingly, in the Daily Express last week, in which he openly defended Shamima Begum and her right to return to pursue her legal claims against the government.
And Surid has not produced any fact or evidence to say that hostile nations include Russia, or hostile nations include the USA as fronted by Trump.
And yet, the reluctance on the part of Theresa May to have the
Russian interferers investigated by the British Secret Service and Boris Johnson's reluctance to release
the report until after the 12th of December election, so-called, show that the most powerful and influential hostile nation, as alleged by the British establishment propagandists, the Soviet Union or the ex-Soviet Union, the current Russia, has practically taken over the control and the agenda of the British government. So who are the hostile nations that Surid is trying to warn the readers of? Surid is there completely lying and is exposed as a very ignorant, disconnected investigative reporter, because she obviously hasn't read David Aronovich's column on the elevation of the ex-Russian spy's son to the House of Peers by Boris Johnson. She has not read the piece that refers to Claire Fox, a terrorist propagandist, celebrating the Warrington bombing and celebrating other acts of massacre and genocide. So Surid is using a stock phrase, insinuating a particular target of propaganda of hatred, but not showing any evidence to support that. If she had the evidence, I would not be making these comments. So I want her to produce the evidence. Otherwise, withdraw this kind of insinuation, apologize, and stop writing this kind of hateful, false, racist propaganda that is aimed at Muslims generally. And she said that would-be terrorists and criminals escaping justice abroad. In Britain, most of the supporters of terrorism escape justice, and they are all, or most of them, are white and they are anti-Muslim themselves. Far-right terrorism is on the increase according to all the reports coming out of the British Secret Services. And yet Surid writes as if there is no such thing as the far-right terrorist threat in the British context today. So she has written another racist, cruel piece of hatred against the victims of genocide, victims of warfare, victims of famine, fleeing to a safe place. It doesn't have to be Britain, anywhere out of those maelstroms is, according to the desperate people fleeing those areas, is safer than the places they're fleeing from. And she says that by the time you read this, there may be even more still. She says 150 migrants reached Britain from France. What is she meaning? Is she saying that by consciously considering the treaty obligations as spelled out in the various treaties that the British government, the British state is signed up to? And Surid has to be held to account for this kind of deliberate incitement to hatred of the victims of warfare and poverty and famine and dislocation caused by
the role of the Western countries occupying those countries they're fleeing, creating warfare in those countries they're fleeing, creating poverty and hunger and famine in the countries they're fleeing, and denying the duties that I spelled out in my broadcast from Channel 4 slot in January 1992, that they should be addressing the hunger and poverty and destitution in those originating countries. What Suri is saying today, 28 years later, is what I foresaw and warned against 28 years earlier and before that. And she's saying that these people who are the victims of genocide, hunger, famine, dislocation, warfare, misconceive England as the El Dorado. She's saying on column 2, she's saying, numbers arriving from faraway countries, dreaming of reaching the El Dorado of England, fell sharply along the people smugglers who suddenly had fewer customers. Now, El Dorado is the land of gold. Who would want to go to a land of gold? These people are not in a position to be seen as calm, collected thinkers and plotters to go to England, the El Dorado. How many victims of racism in Britain can truthfully say that Britain or England is El Dorado? It has never been El Dorado. It is an El Dorado in the corrupt, racist, hateful, ignorant, ill-schooled, ill-educated, brainless brains of the likes of Sue Reed. It is not an El Dorado. People don't aim to enter Britain. They aim to escape the dangerous situations they are in, and they're seeking safety. It's not the same thing as invading the El Dorado. Now, there is a piece in the Daily Mail on page 23, which is of a different kind of context and orientation than everything Sue Reed represents and embodies. This is a piece by Simon Walters. He's not a regular writer in the Daily Mail on Saturdays. The Saturday column that he has been given this Saturday today is often occupied by a racist, ignorant, anti-Muslim, hate priestess, corrupt individual called Amanda Platel. So she is away. Where she is away is not explained, but she is away. She can afford to be away because she's well paid as a racist, hate priestess, anti-Muslim inciter. And this is a piece by Simon Walters. And this is where he has made rare appearance, and the comment he makes could not be more unlike anything Amanda Platel often writes and spews through this column. His piece is headlined that he fears that Boris Johnson has not learned the lessons of John Major's deficiencies and failures. He says sex scandals, economic meltdown, a resurgent opposition. Has the Prime Minister learned nothing from the storms that sank his predecessor? Now, this is of course, a headline, but essentially the point is that Boris Johnson is taking the electors, the society, and the political forces for granted, and that he should pay heed and he should stop misbehaving as he has been doing. And the whole piece is given to Boris Johnson's personal dishonesty, lying, and corruption and falsehood. So the last 4 paragraphs, I'll read this one first. By the time of the 1997 election, Mr. Major had got the economy back on track, but a flat lot of good that did him. The jury is still out on Mr. Johnson's handling of the COVID, but he will have to hope the electorate is more forgiving of him than it was of Mr. Major. It is worth noting that at the next election due in 2024, he will have to engineer a feat no political party in Britain has managed to pull off for 200 years, lead his party to win, to all intents and purposes, 5 general elections in a row. If the Prime Minister is to succeed, he needs to show the country he and his party are governing for the people as he promised, not just for themselves. Like Mr. Major, a weak left-wing Labour leader in the form of Jeremy Corbyn rather than Kinnock helped Mr. Johnson win his first election. Like Mr. Major, it won't be so easy next time round when he is likely to face a revived Labour Party under its new leader. How ironic it would be if Boris, the man who hoped to be a leader like his idol Winston Churchill, instead endures the fate of a much mocked Prime Minister, best remembered for allowing his party to drift onto the rocks. Now this is, Simon Walters is another conservative, and he is not a fan of the Labour Party, let alone of society. He is a tactician, talking tactics and giving a warning to Boris Johnson, whom he miscasts as a fan of Winston Churchill. Boris Johnson is not a fan of Winston Churchill. Boris Johnson's only reason for invoking the name Winston Churchill and making any kind of comparisons, including the various hand gestures and so forth, and photos posed in the style of Winston Churchill, and ingratiating himself with the image of Winston Churchill as has been propelled by and promoted by the right-wing media since Churchill died, is to use what Trump did about the Republicans. Years before he became a candidate for the presidency of the USA, Trump is recorded as having said that the Republican Party has the stupidest membership and he could do anything he likes, and what he has done is exactly what he understood them to be. So the Boris Johnson thinks that the British public, who quote hero worship Winston Churchill, which is not the case, but that is how the image is promoted. Boris Johnson thinks, like Trump, that the British supporters and fans of Winston Churchill are stupid and he can manipulate them, and that is what he is banking on. So Simon Walters is wrong to say that Boris Johnson, the Winston Churchill is Boris Johnson's hero. Winston Churchill is not Boris Johnson's hero. And in any case, Boris Johnson, by comparison with the key role that Winston Churchill is given credit for playing during the years of the war, that role Boris Johnson could not play. Whatever other criticisms that exist, substantiated by evidence of Churchill being a racist and a genocider, as the Indian diplomat and former Assistant or Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations has said, Boris Johnson would not have been able to keep
his own personality together, as Churchill did keep himself together and calmly ordered the transfer of the funds and the resources away from the part of the then still India under the British, thus causing or leading to the deaths of millions of people in Bengal in the famine that could have otherwise have been avoided. So Churchill caused that. So that is what has been alleged and that is what has been elaborated on about the transfer decision that Churchill took. Taking that aside, the role that Churchill has been credited for is the role he played by convincing the American president to take part in the war against Germany. And in doing that, Churchill left no stone unturned, including asking his daughter-in-law to sleep with American diplomats to get information. This is all on the record. Now, to what extent Boris Johnson would have been able to stay in post for even a few months under those pressing times of the war is not factually comparable because the facts are not there. But given all his other behavior and activities listed sympathetically by Simon Walters, Boris Johnson would have crumbled and collapsed long time ago. Now, and the main threat that Simon Walters is dangling in front of Boris Johnson is the threat of a credible opposition leader, unlike Neil Kinnock or Jeremy Corbyn, and the credibility is being in the person of Keir Starmer. And all the other things that Simon Walters is talking about are secondary. The main thing is that he is warning Boris Johnson to get his house in order to stop the Labour Party, even as led by Keir Starmer, getting into power in government in Britain. Well, today's biggest hate piece by the Daily Mail is, of course, another investigation, not Sue Reid's investigation against the migrants, but it's Guy Adams' investigation against the new face of race hate. This is based on the march last week by the mainly African origin, Caribbean origin people marching through London in paramilitary gear. They claim to be fighting bigotry. But as this devastating expose lays bare, their leader revels in anti-Semitic abuse with chilling echoes of 1930s fascism. Now, these are too many things conflated together. First of all, when the racists, that is anti-African, anti-black people, and anti-Muslims, refer to anti-Semitism, they do this by taking the readers and the audience for granted as fools and as idiots, because they craftily and cleverly stay away from addressing racism, and they peddle the assumption that being Jewish represents the whole of the humanity under racist attacks. But they actually distinguish being Jewish from the rest of the victims of racist attacks. This is an original diagnostic analysis. If evidence exists that what I have just spoken is not true, then I would invite evidence from anyone watching this or seeing this or understanding what I'm saying. But this is the crux of the analysis.
that saying things that are then labeled as anti-Semitic does not include people who are not Jewish, because the term anti-Semitic is used in this context to represent the Jewish people only. What about the victims of racism who are not Jewish? That has not been addressed. That has never been explained, and it needs to be addressed and explained, and it needs to be the main phrase. The main phrase is the victims of racism, not just Jewish victims of anti-Jewish hatred or racism. All victims of racism must be the phrase and the narrative and the agenda and the explanation and the discourse. That's what I'm saying in relation to this particular statement put in the Daily Mail piece by the investigative writer Guy Adams. Now, Guy Adams recently has taken over as the main investigative writer or byliner in the Daily Mail group, and not Sue Reed. Sue Reed used to be the main one, or one of the more prominent ones promoted through the Daily Mail, but it is Guy Adams who has been covering more items and more issues. That's an editorial planning and administration and commission point I have just made. So these people who the Guy Adams piece is calling as a new face of race hate, are they the new face of race hate? And are they genuinely against racism? And are they representative of the ordinary black communities in this country? Because the slogan Black Rights Lives Matter itself is exclusive in many ways. It does signify opposition to anti-black racism. By anti-black there is meant black people as originating or descending from African backgrounds and ancestry. What about the people who are attacked racistly and attacked by racists, but who are Asians or are Asian descendant people, including significantly large numbers of Muslims, Asians, and from Africa and North Africa as well. So the Black Lives Matter is on its own acceptable, understandable, but it doesn't include everyone. And there the debate has to be conducted until a definitive, all-comprehensive, all-inclusive coverage is available for defending all victims of racism. Just in the case of use of the anti-Semitic word or phrase, so is Black Lives Matter. These are in need of expansion to be inclusive of all victims of racism. Now, the rest of the Guy Adams investigation is obviously fueled by anti-Labour Party kind of agenda. And there are mentions of people like Rebecca Long Bailey and others. And so therefore that is not a truly factual, objective piece about this group of people who call the FF force or paramilitary. Now there is no evidence that I have seen of where these people came from and who organized them, who mobilized them. It is something that we shall be continuing to investigate before we establish most of the background facts and factors behind the mobilization and the march. But essentially, this Guy Adams piece in the Daily Mail is not inspired by any dedication to oppose racism. It is
inspired by the agenda of anti-black, pro-racist narrative. So where is the Daily Mirror countering this, or the Guardian countering this? Not so far. So we have to see what the Guardian does about that, and if it does at all examine the racism of the Daily Mail in this context. In the Times today, Saturday the 8th of August, there is a piece about Jeremy Corbyn and his allies claiming that Labour Party officials sabotaged 2017 election. Well, that is what they are saying, but I have said all along, and I have said it exclusively originally for months before Corbyn caved into Johnson over the 2017 election, that the success electorally that the Tories were going to get, and now they have got, was mainly due to Corbyn's personal unfitness and his intellectual deficiencies. I have said that, and I'm saying it again in relation to this piece on page 2 of the Times today, that Corbyn and his allies are blaming officials for sabotaging the 2017 election. That is a fact. Of course, these officials sabotaged Corbyn's activities and behavior. But essentially, the biggest platform that Corbyn gave away was by him failing to use the platform that was available to him for 5 years. As I have said repeatedly, and I'm saying it again, because I've said more often in print than in video accounts, Corbyn sprinted away, ran away, fled, assembled broadcast media holding the microphone in front of him as he left his Islington house. Whenever he did that, either 3 times a week, 2 times a week, or 4 times, or any number of days or times every week, or every time he did that, he ran, he flew away from the ready microphones and the cameras. Now, the point of that, in the age and in the environment of media done in that way, is this: if he had nothing to say in agreeing with them, because most of the crew were putting hostile questions to him, it was still a fault on the part of Corbyn to miss that opportunity. And the opportunity is not in the content of what he said. The opportunity he missed was in the fact that he had this opportunity to say anything at all. That would be the log, that would be the record. And he could say, I told you this on that occasion and you failed to report it accurately, or you didn't report at all. That way, there would have been literally hundreds of occasions which he could cite as evidence of the media deliberately denying him the truth. But he didn't take that. And his advisors, as I have said, including Shimas Miel, failed to grasp that, as Corbyn himself did. So whatever sabotage his officials, the Labour Party officials in place at the time, carried out to undermine that Labour Party's success in the election, it was secondary, or it was tertiary. It was even less important than secondary. The main fault lies with Corbyn. Now, on the pages 6 and 7, written by Sam Joyner, Nicola Woolcock, Daniel Clark, and Tom Calver, 4 reporters have written a 2-page piece about schools and children carrying knives. And it says,
Pupils in the grip of knife and drug gangs at a third of schools. A third of schools, that is 30% of the schools have got this problem. So the schools are not schools for learning and education. The schools are now becoming war fields. So who is taking any action about that? Is Boris Johnson bothered about stopping this? Is Keir Starmer bothered about it? Is any MP? And that is something that has to be left there for answers, because there is no answer, there is no comment, there is no intervention by any of these people so far, and there is no evidence that local councils are doing their job in stopping that kind of culture and that kind of spread of violence in the schools in their areas. And there is this editorial in the Times on the subject, page 29, which says, that securing schools against the activities of gangs is a policing priority, while wider programs to tackle violence among young people have a record of success. But this is too timid a piece. It doesn't really spell out the failures. And the failures include the police failures. And the failures include the failure by the councils, and failure by the Home Office, and failures by the rest of the government and the rest of the establishment and the media. They don't report frequently enough or at all about these things that are threatening the safety and the lives of children in the schools and the wider community. And the Sun is celebrating the decision by the ITB to shift this brainwashing program away from the jungles in Australia, as they say, to a location in Britain. I'm a celebrity inside, it says exclusive hit show in wintry Wales. And they're, of course, celebrating one image of a wet myelin glass or class from a previous edition of the brainwashing show. And the rest of the paper, The Sun, is dedicated to trivial tabloid rubbish, including in this one. So can I get a bikini wax or sleep with a stranger? I mean, this is the kind of thing that the Sun trades on, and the Murdoch made billions on. The scum and the page 3 were the main source of the billions that Murdoch made before he expanded his media empire into the USA. It is the open pornography, the language and the seduction and the titillation that exhibited itself on page 3 and the rest of the media kind of coverage of the tabloid that attracted the most gullible readers, and they were persuaded to hand over to Murdoch by the Sun collectively billions of pounds. And Murdoch still remains a reluctant taxpayer in Britain, which is where he made the billions. And he controls the government, he controls the agenda. Now here, they are talking about the tiniest migrant. Todd survives boat ordeal, 130 people intercepted yesterday. From Calais to Dover, 29 miles. And they're talking about this in the Sun, which is less harrowing a description, harrowing to the brainwashable, than the corresponding piece or pieces run by the Daily Mail today, with the hate incitement by Sue Reed. And the rest of the paper is full of trash, the Sun. And there is a kind of rare piece in the Sun where the relationship between Charles and Harry is treated in a positive way for a change. Why that is, they don't say, but it is clearly connected with the various legal actions that they're trying to give the kind of appearance that they are not hostile and they're not motivated by racist hatred and intolerance of Meghan when they run pieces critical of Harry and Meghan. Now, there is a page given to a pig running away with a bag of a nudist in a nudist colony. I'm not going to put it before the camera. So these are the there's a piece about the Foreign Office cat retiring, Palmerston, apparently. Now let's see, before we look at this piece on page 33 about a bull in a Spanish so-called sport. And the cruelty to the animals is celebrated here by reporting that a bull that attacked a man who had stabbed it with a sword was later killed. And it says the last line, Spain's bullfights have just restarted after lockdown with rings up to half full. Now, bullfighting is a criminal offense. It should be banned, full stop. And yet they are celebrating it. And the cruelty of the murdering of the bull, which was the victim in the stabbing in Cadiz, is being reported in this cruel and unkindly and anti-animal way. So there is no item in the Daily Mirror or the Guardian as a routine, as a rule, that shows that cruelty to animals is something that the Labour Party is taking as a serious priority in its politics. And the same thing applies with the environment. Same thing applies with all the other things that are contained adequately in the many charters and conventions that Britain is signatory to. So here is the ending of this edition of the Diagnostic Look at the Saturday editions of the papers, otherwise known as Fleet Street, but they're England-centric, London-centric, and the contents of what I have said here are explanatory, self-evident, based on what I have diagnosed.